Have your attention and quiet down, please. Our featured speaker this evening is someone that's been a key person in giving out information on what's happening with Mille Lacs Lake and all the issues with the tribal issues that have been going on. I don't know how many of you subscribe to Outdoor News, but if you're like me, Thursday is a good day to go get the mail because that's when the weekly Outdoor News comes. We have some great writers in there, and one of them has a very good column every week called Rocking the Boat, and he certainly does right on the edge, doesn't really hold back anything. When he gives his opinion, he's a straight shooter. That's Joe Fellegy, and we're pleased to have him with us here this evening to speak. Again, his column, Rocking the Boat. Joe, if you can please come up and address us. Let's give a round of applause for Joe. We can have a quiet, please.
Yeah, well, he said that I'm a writer. That's true. I'm not much of a talker. So this is a rare deal that I get hoodwinked into giving a speech. I'm not a pro with a mic either. I'm not holding it at the right distance.
Maybe hold it down a little bit.
Hold it down?
Yeah.
All right. Now, you know, I'm a writer and a fisherman, and I don't hold many records, but I got a few. I am the big rat that helped oust several illegitimate state record fish. Even the stinking largemouth bass. My personal eel pout record is 27 in one sitting. I did that one evening about 40 years ago on Mille Lacs Lake. On the daily launch trip, you know, I used to do that years ago for many years, 7 days a week. One time I had 6 people puking all at the same time. I had gone 4 months without anybody seasick, and all of a sudden I had 6 of them in one morning trip. I hold a rare record too. Of all the people in this room, I may have set more gill nets and handled more gill-netted fish than anybody in here. But most of them were tulipies, and a few crocodiles, and a few eel pout, and very few walleyes. You know, one of the big issues out here at Mille Lacs that's been here for a number of years, ever since the late 90s, is this spawning time gill net fishery. And, you know, a lot of the newspaper people, a lot of the reports, always use the word affirmed, as though all this stuff out there was affirmed in a treaty or by the Supreme Court. Now, no court ever ordered a single gill net in Mille Lacs during spawning time. That all came about through politicking, agreements between the tribal attorneys, tribal politicos, and your DNR, and then that was okayed by a federal district court. There's nothing etched in stone by a treaty or by a court that we have to have gill nets in Mille Lacs during the spawning time. Now, a lot of the academics and highfalutin political people and journalists can't understand why the average guy and gal cares about gill nets during spawning time. Well, let's face it, it's one of the biggest cultural slaps at Minnesota that you could have. Our culture is what? Closed seasons during the spawning time. It's kind of a sacred time. So we don't even angle during that time. So one of the lousiest things you can have, an in-your-face slap at Minnesotans, is to have a spawning time gill net fishery. Just this last week, the DNR announced closing 6 more streams in Clearwater and Beltrami counties. Why? to protect concentrated spawners. Well, Mille Lacs walleyes don't spawn in streams, they spawn in the lake. They can be very concentrated. One night about 10 days ago, a friend told me that he talked to a conservation officer, and between two east side landings, there were 200 gill nets set out of these places. Now that's just out of two accesses, one night out of many nights. 200 gill nets, each 100 feet long. That's almost 4 miles of net, not just randomly set out in the middle of the lake or somewhere, but along the shoreline shoals where walleyes spawn. If you and I set a gill net out during spawning time at dark, and then we went in and hoisted a couple of grain bell premiums, and then we went back to check the nets. By the way, one of us could just walk it out with waders. We wouldn't even have to get in a boat. We'd pull in the net. There might be 20 walleyes or 40, who knows? So it's a real affront, and it's too bad that more people don't understand how bad this thing is. Now, I brought along a gill net, and just as a prop, because a lot of people don't know what a gill net is. A lot of people think it's like a seine that goes around and catches fish. Anyhow, by the way, not being a talker, somebody cut me off at the right time. I'll go on 10 or 15 minutes or whatever. I won't take you into the midnight hour. But anyway, who's a volunteer here that can help me string a gill net? I want to show you a little bit what it is. This is going to be a good one now. Howie Hansen, who has demonstrated on the Capitol steps with signs and placards, ban the net.
Gill net skip.
Howie Hansen is going to help Joe Fellegy string out a 100-foot gill net just to show you what it looks like, see? Oh, I thought that was the cooler with the gill net.
The cooler.
By the way, in the name of unequal rights, I haven't been able to use my gill nets. I got 2 of them. I haven't been able to use the darn things for about 4 or 5 years because they banned tubing netting for licensed Minnesota fishermen, but the tribal side can net 2 of these in the fall at Mille Lacs. That's just one of those little inequalities. Well, now wait. That's the weight. Here's the top. There you go. No, wait a minute. Now this is just one net. Hold it up, kids.
We got us a former representative.
Look at this. We have all kinds of headers.
Yeah, you're netting me.
We got Sandra.
Keep going, keep going.
Look at that, and we still have more to go, and that's just one gill net. Now, the gill nets that tubing netters use, they're 3 feet deep, 100 feet long. The tribal nets are 4 feet deep. Now, these are left in the water overnight, The top line floats to help keep the net vertical, and the bottom line is called the lead line, and that keeps it down. Each end of the net has a weight and a float, a marker, so we can find it the next morning. But now, can you imagine, this is one net, and fish swim into it and get entangled in the mesh. Now, in a recent Star Tribune article, they said the band uses mesh that are 1.5 inches in size, square. Well, yes, that's bar size, but they stretch to 3.5 stretch mesh. And that's the same size that we use for 2 of these in the fall. So anyway, imagine hundreds of these set among spawning walleyes along the shore of Mille Lacs. It is really a dramatic thing. The timing of it violates our own culture, and the method sure flies in the face of our own values. And that's why people are upset, one reason. So anyway, we'll rack up the net, and thanks for the show and tell. We'll call you back to order in a second. Say, I'll have to hire her to go around.
Take longer spots. Otherwise, we'll have a take like a.
Who sits right there? No?
Hey, like they say in Piers, you've done good. Now Hanson has the net tangled up, but that's all right. He's from Rainy Lake, you know, where they commercial fish.
I've never done this.
Just throw the whole works in the cooler, Hanson, and that'll work. I got all day tomorrow to untangle the net.
Here, we'll
All
get out of
day?
the way. Joe, you get up to top.
Hey, Joe,
All right.
tell them how many pounds in each net.
Okay. Former and future Representative Erickson asked how many pounds of walleye get caught in the net. Well, that depends on how lucky the fisherman is. But if they get 30 or 40 walleyes in a net, then you've got, on average, 60 or 80 pounds. And of course, this year's allotment for the gill net fishery, that subsistence fishery, is 67.5 tons, or 135,000 pounds, before your season starts. Now, one of the big issues with gill netting in the spring, such a vast gill net fishery, one of the big issues is bycatch. Now remember, when you net fish, you're targeting a fish. In my case, it was tullabies. In their case, it's walleyes. But we can't control what all swims into the net. So, every spring, tons of northern pike are caught in gill nets. And any old netter knows that when you deal with crocodiles in your gill net, you've got a pointed snout and you've got a lot of teeth, and they twist and turn, and even in cold water, they're half drowned, a lot of them are dead. A few are hooked by a few teeth, and you can let them go. But anyway, many of these northerns are chucked, tossed out on the lake. They're mainly unwanted, and they don't even come into the landings to get measured, weighed, and counted toward the pike quota. Why do they want to avoid the pike quota? Because if they hit the pike quota first, then they have to stop netting walleyes. Now, I mentioned that no treaty and no court ever demanded that there be a single gill net in Mille Lacs. How the bands harvest and how they manage their fishery is a political thing. It's just like your state of Minnesota has the right to manage its resources. It's been that way since we became a state. Minnesota, by virtue of being a state, can manage its resources. Now, how they do it was not mandated in 1858 when we became a state. 365 days a year. Policymakers deal with how people can fish and hunt, how we regulate and all of that. And it can be debated and discussed. Notice the tribal managers somehow are immune from discussion and debate and 365 days a year scrutiny. Another thing to remember, 21st century Ojibwe culture. And remember, a lot of this stuff is decorated and insulated with the word culture. Tradition is another one. All these sweet-sounding terms. And really, Ojibwe culture today doesn't demand any gill netting, for God's sake. We have people out there who make $50,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year. Their salaries are paid before they leave Wisconsin. Many of them paid by you. Because tribal equals federal. And a lot of people don't know it, but we subsidize tribal governments and tribal resource management agencies. Now, my grandpa, who lived between 1878 and 1967, he blasted away at ducks to the tune of hundreds from Swan Lake down in Nicollet County and in many places in those prairie potholes. They blasted and killed and shot ducks by the hundreds, and I've seen pictures of piles and strings of prairie chickens like you couldn't believe. But that was their culture. If I came along before the legislature or the DNR or outdoor writers and I wanted to operate like my grandpa did years ago, why everybody would flip out. And yet here we have this fiction about culture and need that drives this thing along.
Joe,
One issue, kids, that... pardon?
pull the mark away from the mouth a bit.
Okay, is this better? Yes. All right. One thing that has never gotten its due coverage in the press, it's never gotten proper political debate after the state lost that court case. I won't bore you with the details there, but my feeling from being around the place back in the 90s is that they actually wanted to lose. A lot of arguments they could have used to win. Anyway, the state could have blocked this road, this gill netting. If the state's attorneys really wanted to win, or at least push our interests as far as they could, they would have had the state biologists say, hey, wait a minute. We haven't had gill nets in Mille Lacs Lake during spawning time for over 100 years. We can't have this happen. They could have used a conservation argument and said, we need 10 years of study. You know, they love studies. Well, they could have demanded a 10-year study and brought that before the district court in phase 2 of the trial, but they didn't. So anyway, we have this monstrosity. Now, one other thing that I'd like to address for sure is the average person's concern about equal rights. Now, a lot of the sophisticated journalists and academics and politicians they go into a big swoon, they go into an adoring trance when they hear the word sovereignty, sovereign nation. Well, let's face it, the average people for 30 years were told to be colorblind and that equal rights was the ideal. All right? we bought that admirably. People bought onto that. The average Mary, the average Joe bought onto equal rights, color blindness, and believe me, in a community like Mille Lacs, where we had a lot of tribal people, there was a lot of togetherness before the new sovereignty and the Indian industry took over. See, now you've got, instead of the Indians, and your wrath and your resentment should not fall on the Indians. This has to do with the Indian industry, the lawyers, the lobbyists, the PR people, the management bureaucracy. This is all above and beyond the Indians, so don't hate them, but despise the Indian industry and those who facilitate it. But this equal rights thing is very important with people. And now, what do they hear? Celebrating differences. They see separate fishing seasons, separate methods, separate regulations, and it's not a good deal. One thing, I don't know if I mentioned it, you should know that the taxpayers fund all the tribal DNRs, the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, that's the umbrella group for the Indian bands in the 1837 area. And somehow, they aren't very accountable to us. And our politicians and media people don't hold their feet to the fire, so this stuff just continues. So what is going to happen here? So far, you don't have a lot of attention given in the media, in government, politics. Somehow we'll have to wake up that control culture. By the way, some of you probably saw the headlines yesterday about the Leech Lake and White Earth bands announcing that they were going to start a new ceded territory off-reservation portion, and they were going to do an illegal fish-in on Lake Bemidji the Friday before the opener. Well, that already got 1 million people shook up, rightly so. It was a major slap at Minnesota and its government. Imagine how the DNR would have to react to something like that. Well, it was announced late yesterday and in some of the morning press that apparently the attorney and legal team and that William Mitchell College of Law professor that was interviewed on public radio and in the press, they didn't have the go-ahead from the Leech Lake Tribal Council. So now they've apparently called the whole thing off. But we aren't going to have George Gershwin's tune, "Let's Call the Whole Thing Off," played anywhere at the Capitol or anywhere. Well, anyway, I've taken up quite a bit of your time. I don't know if I should have gotten into any other topics, but if there's a major question that I might be able to answer, I'm sure this head table will have some wise one. And of course, I hope you don't get tangled up in any gill nets. And you know, one reason they have this, they can't have a gill net fishery in the middle of a sport fishing arena. It would be a public safety hassle. Can you imagine some poor couple coming in at 10 o'clock to come in after the night band in spring, cruising along and all of a sudden getting 200-foot gill nets caught in their crop? So anyway, the only way they can have it, to have a gill net fishery, if they have to have it, is to have it in the spawning, during the spawning time, and it is a major hassle. Okay. Anybody, anything?
Good job.